Elle believes that poetry can empower the powerless and give voice to the voiceless. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Elle.
Thank you. And I really want to thank Tanya for that beautiful poem, teaching us lessons and showing us what poetry can do. And anyone who knows poets knows that poets don't always have good things to say about each other, but I've never heard a bad word about Tanya, so from anyone in Canada. So I think that in itself is a real accomplishment. I wrote down what I wanted to say because I realized I was nervous, and then it's like right long, so I'm going to cut the bit about goals. So if you're curious, you can ask me later, because I think my poem's long too. I'm like right long. I guess I want to use this time to say two things. The first thing is that the reason I'm standing here today is because of the support of so many communities who made it possible for me to speak. From Word is Bond, who were the first open mic I ever attended, to all the organizations who invited me to speak, to the individual people who hired me, I wouldn't be able to speak if people hadn't given me the space to make that possible. And so it makes me proud, not because I'm being honored, although I can't lie, I'm like super happy. Because I feel that all those community members and people from so many diverse and often marginalized communities have been recognized today for their contributions to making poetry possible. And I feel like they stand here with me in spirit. So I want to thank them. And I'm happy to live in a city where we understand the importance that poetry and the arts play, and I truly believe that art saves lives. So I thank everybody here at City Hall for supporting that ideal and committing to make poetry available to all of us. And the second thing I wanted to say was just a message, particularly to the youth here today, but to anyone who for some reason hears this. And I wanted to say that I've never published a book, but I'm here today after following a path that isn't traditional, so don't let anybody stop you or tell you that there's only one way to be a success or to have your dream. The first time I applied to be Poet Laureate, I got back that letter thanking me for applying, and this time I almost didn't apply, but I'm glad I did. My ancestors did not have the opportunity to speak, and I've had people literally threaten to kill me for saying what I had to say. So don't, and I'm not saying that to be angry, but because I want to let you know that you can speak out. Find the people who support you, and even when you're afraid and people don't like what you have to say or don't want you to give you room to say it, find your voice and speak. If it's in poetry or in life, don't let people tell you what you can't do. You are worth hearing and you are important. You have something to say that nobody else can. So keep fighting for your voice, and I promise you someone will listen, and it will be worth it. Okay, I'm going to do a poem, and this is actually the poem I did for the interview process. I'm going to say a little bit about it because when I knew I got the interview, I asked people on Facebook to give me their best and worst experience with Halifax. Some of you in the room helped me out with that. And I said it was for a poetry project. I didn't tell them. So I took everything that people said in that response and I made it into a poem about Halifax. So this is also written by so many other people that gave me these ideas. This poem was not written by the tourism board. It was pulled off the chalkboard outside of Fred. It was read in letters to the Chronicle Herald and shouted out at protests. We drummed this poem out on Treaty Day, on Natal Day, on Canada Day, and at Grand Parade we waved this poem in rainbow flags, we sprayed this poem in graffiti tags, and we saved this poem from jumping off the bridge. This poem wants to live. This poem was found under the hashtag for better or for worse, Halifax is my home on Twitter. It was pulled with litter from the harbor and it dropped in blood outside the men's club. We carried it with the dump trucks out of Africa. It was fired from the cannon at noon off Citadel Hill. It rose from the silence at every candlelight vigil. It gathered for Rehtaeh Parsons and Raymond Tavell because this poem represents our will to survive. You cannot drive this poem out. This poem stands on unceded Mi'kmaq territory and Turtle Island. It was exiled with the Acadians, but it refused to go. It was reduced to wreckage in the explosion, but it could not be blown away. It was tapping out messages in the telegraph office to the very last moment. Every last word of this poem is heroic. It was hiding like escaped slaves in cargo holds, and it took hold in the imagination. It was carved out of scalping proclamations against women and children, and it shouted them down until there were powwows right this poem by the millions, by trial and error, coming together like Halifax, Dartmouth, Bedford, and Sackville because we believe in something bigger than ourselves. This poem is the echo of our brilliance. And sometimes you'll feel like this poem is up in your business, but then there's nothing like its support when things go wrong. This poem's word is its one. This poem is Inshallah, Amen, Ashe, and Shalom, and it knows the honest song because we wrote this poem fighting to be strong. It rose up in the prayers of everyone told they didn't belong, but we made Halifax our home. We replanted this poem after Hurricane 1 and barbecued this poem and handed it out on the block when the power was gone. This poem is how we feed our soul. It was told in the truth of 1,000 shared struggles, and this poem came with new Canadians on planes and shuttles, and it landed at Pier 21. You won't always see this poem on the news. This poem thinks there should be better bus routes. It was written by everyone who couldn't afford a boat cruise, so this poem took the ferry back and forth across the harbor for $2.25 instead, and it was beautiful. Parts of this poem can't afford the rent, so this poem has learned to be thrifty. We followed this poem through misty early morning fogs and breathed it out with the joggers of Point Pleasant and Shuby and in the barks of off-leash dogs. This poem was logged at the farmer's market, the African market, the hairdresser's market, and the discount supermarket, bookmark, and the flea market at the forum, because this poem does not discriminate or choose a target audience to play to. It changes every 15 minutes like the weather, so this poem is composed of many lanes. This poem is as tight as the rush hour traffic on Bayers Road. This poem never says McKay or McDonald, but just the new bridge or the old. It is exit 0 on the Trans-Canada Highway because this poem is where mainland Canada begins and ends. This poem was probably friends with your grandmother, because that's still how we roll. We traced this poem with skate blades at the Oval. This poem was cut from ice and snow. We laughed out this poem at the candy show. It was buried in the graveyards of bodies from the Titanic, and it washes over you like waves of the Atlantic. We heard pieces of this poem in the public projects, public housing, public parks, public libraries, the public gardens and public pools, and this poem openly holds hands with its gay partner in public. This poem is liberal arts hipster cool. It was spit out the gas pipes of the cars of everyone leaving for Toronto, and it came back to us like children often do. It was beat out in the rhythm of the oars on Lake Banook. This poem stands through hurricanes and is never shook. You can smell this poem in every breath of ocean air because this poem is so fresh. It is fiddles and bagpipes and sea shanties mixed with djembe and bangara and soca, and you can hear this poem at karaoke night because sometimes this poem gets drunk on local beer. This poem knows all the words to Barrett's Privateers. This poem wants to serve you Garrison and Propeller and Keats, and it will meet you for Donaires and Rocco Street meets. This poem, Sons of the Seals on Black Rock Beach. This poem will rain on you from all directions, and it might decide to snow in May. You might have seen this poem at the Canada Games. This poem is spinning rhymes in the bike lane. This poem doesn't know where the word Haligonian came from, but it uses it anyway because this poem is the meeting of locals and come from away. This poem uses some as an intensifier because sometimes it is just some cold out today. And it also says you girl and blue mat and A because that's just Maritime's grammar. And this poem has Maritime's manners, so you will find this poem friendly. And you will envy this poem the serenity of the ocean, but complain about the tolls to cross the bridge because this poem is raising kids on a budget. This poem sometimes bitches about this place because it loves it. This poem gets dressed up when the ships are in, so when you ask this poem how its parents met, it changes the subject. We heard this poem in the Mooseheads and Rainmen announces. This poem can't always get past the bounces of the bars downtown, and it's still trying to hail a cat. This poem wears head wraps and hijab, and it rocks a fitted cap, and it will give you daps and drop head nods on you like drum beats of the tattoo, because this poem refuses to be beaten down. There may be rumors that this poem is a tournament baby. This poem is a historic property. You see, this poem remembers. This poem fills with students in September. It is the energy of youth, and this poem found its voice in the Black Student Advising Center. It is open mics and poetry collectives, Nocturne and the Jazz Festival, CKDU and the Bus Stop Theater, Centerline Studios on the corner of Uniacke and Gottingen, Albany Landing and the Multicultural Festival, the Lebanese Festival, Greek Fest, and Chinese New Year, because this poem speaks in many tongues. It is Sunday brunch at the Westin and John's Lunch, blues night at Bearley's and indie bands at Gus's Pub. This poem used to drive the Bedford Highway to Pete's Boutique when it was the only store open on Sunday afternoons. It vibrated the tent ropes at the Actorville reunion and as moonlight strolls along the boardwalk in Cow's Eye Street. This poem was born in dreams, and it was blown through the sails of tall ships. It dropped from the lips of lobster fishermen, and it was traced in the hips of belly dancers. This poem is still searching for the answers. We argued over this poem like names on schools and Cornwallis statues because, like us, this poem is a work in progress. This poem is my city, Halifax, and it is written in the heartbeat of every citizen. It is felt in the sense of history around every corner and transformed by people coming from all corners of the world. It is given to every visitor in the striking of the town clock bells. It was grown out of the rock and shells. We built it step by step and forged it out of arguments. We voted for it in elections and felt it in family connections. This city is a poem, and every day we are composing it together. This city, Halifax, Nova Scotia, is our home.